So now I would like to introduce you to Professor Dawn Skelton. And Dawn leads on later life training thousands of healthcare professionals to deliver physical activity sessions for people living with a range of conditions, including osteoporosis. And Dawn, your passion is getting people to move, or encouraging people to move at any stage in life. And your company motto is make movement your mission. So I think I'm going to hand over to you and you can hear more about that. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. And as you can see, I'm not lithe and I'm not wearing lycra, and it's all about moving more in your daily life to enjoy life. So my mission this morning is to try and encourage you to do a little bit more than you do already, and ideally work up to something that we know will make a big difference to bone. But we also know that things take time. Yes, not working. And so essentially, when we're young, we spend a lot of our time rushing about. We fall over all the time. It doesn't worry us. We're constantly building bone by adding impact, doing things which help our bone strength, our muscle strength, which pulls on bone, improve our balance. After all, as children, we fall over a lot until we can work out how we best stay upright. And then we have an adult life where we quite often, unless we're really into some sort of sport, sit mostly with work, with leisure activities, etc. And what can happen as we get older is that some of those things that we did without paying a thought to it, we perhaps start avoiding. So things that start becoming a bit more difficult. And really, I guess part of what I want to talk to you about today is the importance of staying active. Exercise is not going to do for your bone what medications can. I'm going to be honest. What it can do is give you quality of life, be able to get out and have fun with people, do the things you used to do, and so keep you connected. Because what we do know is that sadly on diagnosis, a lot of people reduce activity. And that means they become less connected. So essentially, we're all about moving more so we've got life in our years. Exercise has many benefits, and at different age parts of your age, it will have different benefits. And often when we get to more advanced stages, and I'm talking me as well, so mid-50s, exercise is much more about maintaining independence, maintaining good balance to keep on your feet, not trip over, than it is about disease prevention. Because by that point, you've probably already got a bit of the disease going on. So exercise is less about prevention. But we do know that it's important to be active when we're young to build that basic layer of bone in the first place. And I have to say that's where I've got most concern nowadays, because most kids don't do enough activity to build their bone. So it's really important to have that first scaffolding. But when we're adults, we know that if we look at people that are more active, they're less likely to have type 2 diabetes, less likely to have cancers, more likely to have a good quality of life, sleep better, less likely to get dementia. So physical activity and exercise has an important part to play across our age range. But it also has much more. Be able to get out the bath still, be able to get on the floor to play with your grandchildren, be comfortable to pick up your grandchildren. All of these things are really important, and they involve fitness. And that involves you doing something to maintain the fitness. So it's a bit of a vicious circle, because sometimes it's just easier to sit down, isn't it? And as soon as you sit down, things become a bit more difficult and you start avoiding them, and that vicious circle kicks in. But we know even if someone's bedbound, physical activity and exercise has a benefit. So it can reduce constipation, it can reduce the chance of deep vein thrombosis, all of those sorts of things. Movement is really important. And I guess really one of the things I want to remind you of is that if you are even if your bones are weaker, 95% of fractures happen as a result of a fall. So if you can keep yourself from falling, you're less likely to have a problem. So fall prevention is a very key part. I'm going to ask you now, you don't have to put your hand up, but it'd be nice if you would. Have you had a fall in the last year? If you look around the room, that's probably a third of the room. That would be the same if I asked a group of students. So if you ask a group of first-year nursing students, have you fallen in the last year? A third of them will put their hand up. It's not a problem if they fall though, because they've got stronger bones. They can get up again pretty quickly, looking very embarrassed, but they can do that. The issue is, as we get older, that fall becomes a bigger thing. Either we're more likely to fracture, we're more likely to not be able to get up off the floor. So part of what I'm going to talk about today is the exercise and activities that will help bone, but also the exercise and activities that will help you prevent some falls. We won't stop all falls. They happen, but we can fall a bit better. More importantly, we can get up again. And those things mean that we tend not to avoid activity because we're feeling more confident in general. So here's some of the figures from quite an old publication now, because as you can see, it's called the National Osteoporosis Society. Of course, it's now the Royal Osteoporosis Society. So it's quite an old piece of information, but this really struck me some years ago. 1 in 3 people who have fractured as a result of osteoporosis have difficulty doing domestic chores. 1 in 2 have given up a sport or an activity that they used to enjoy doing. Why? And it's inconsistent information, and it's fear, and it's all sorts of things that can kick in. But actually, by doing less, you're increasing your risk of having a problem. So it's really important that we start thinking more about how we can make a difference to activity restriction and move more. Just move past those. Right. So I want to introduce you to a document that was published a few years ago now, and which we're just about hoping to start and rejuvenate and check if there's any more evidence to update it. Essentially, Strong, Steady and Straight was an expert consensus by the Royal Osteoporosis Society about exercise. And it was pulled together purely because the number of people that rang the helpline saying, I get different advice whoever I talk to. So I'll talk to somebody and they say, oh, don't lift that weight. And someone else go, oh, I wouldn't do that. And someone else go, yeah, of course you can. And it's this inconsistent advice that they were getting from health professionals that made them decide it's better not to do anything then because I might do something wrong. So we wanted to produce this statement for that main reason. We looked at this and it's called Strong, Steady and Straight because you can do exercise or activity to improve bone strength. Steady is the bit about staying upright, and straight is the bit about vertebral fractures and what you might do after that, because it's painful to do exercise after vertebral fractures. So a little bit about those, the reason we picked those 3 themes. Our main point is how to do something rather than not to do something. So our point is that, yes, there are some moves, activities, which are higher risk. But if you've always loved doing them, and it wasn't those that caused your fracture, why have you stopped doing it? So it's really to come back to that and actually have a conversation with yourself and others about what level of risk you're prepared to take to do something or remain doing something that you love doing. Okay. Again, possibly a little bit blurry, and I would encourage you to have a look on the Royal Osteoporosis site, and it possibly on the Lydia site. There's on the link on there as well, I imagine. But essentially, the main thing is that we should be encouraging all people to do more rather than less. And that's irrespective of whether we're talking about osteoporosis, heart disease, lung cancers. We know that exercise has a benefit with almost every condition that is out there. We wanted to make sure that people who had painful vertebral fractures had prompt and correct advice, i.e. don't go home and sit and do nothing till you see a physio, because that might be another 6 to 9 months before you see one. And in that 6 to 9 months of sitting, you will get considerably worse. So it's all about that prompt advice. We want to ensure that people understand the potential risks of some activities and appropriately decide whether or not they're going to take those risks. At no point should we be saying to somebody you shouldn't do that, is the real point I'm saying. We spent a lot of time looking at potential risks. We looked at the literature, considerable amount of literature. Okay, is there anything that we should go, definitely don't do that? And really we couldn't come up with anything. There were fractures in some of those exercise programs in the literature, but actually they were just as common in the control group that weren't doing the exercise as they were in the groups that were doing the exercise. So we just again want to perhaps temper in this concern that everybody had about, you mustn't do forward flexion, you mustn't do. Yes, there are some issues. I'll come back to some of those in a minute. But essentially, if someone's new to exercise, there's always some additional risks because they're perhaps not used to that type of movement. So you need to take things slowly. But if they're experienced and have enjoyed something for a lot of their life, we shouldn't be saying don't do it. For people who've had vertebral fractures or low trauma fractures, in other words, they were just wandering across their kitchen and tripped over and bumped into the side surface and got a fracture, we need to think about considering how much impact we put on and how slowly we build that. So we don't want to suddenly go into something high impact, i.e. jumping on a trampoline, because potentially that is going to be an issue. But that's quite rare. Most people don't have that low trauma or fracture. They've normally fallen from height, for example. So let me talk a little bit now about the types of activities that will help. If you just do a snapshot of the population who are active and a snapshot of the population who aren't, people who do more exercise have 40% less fractures. So that's a cross-sectional study. What you could argue is that everybody that went and did the exercise were genetically interested in doing or had good bones anyway. So cross-sectional studies are never that good at being certain about whether that made a real difference. The controlled trials are ones where they've introduced some type of exercise or activity. And actually we see on long term, looking at those people where you've introduced it, that you reduce fracture risk. So whichever way you look at it, exercise and activity help. I put on here a couple of activities which you might go, ooh, do I really want to still do that if I've been diagnosed with osteoporosis? Horse riding. If you fall off a horse, whether your bones are good or not, you're likely to break something. So why would we say to somebody, don't, if they've always loved horse riding? They have to be aware if they fall off that horse and they've got osteoporosis, they're probably going to fracture. But this should be a choice. And to take away someone's ability to go horse riding when they've always loved doing it, or to suggest they don't, I think we need to really be thinking about. Cycling actually is the activity with the highest risk of fracture. There's some lovely data from the Netherlands, which of course everybody cycles in the Netherlands, and it is the most risky form of activity you can do. But am I going to say to somebody don't cycle? Again, we need to be thinking about the fit with the person. You've got a gentleman there who's being helped by his carer to carry on doing golf. Yes, there have been some instances of golf causing a fracture, vertebral fracture. So golf club, hitting a ball, rotating. But again, it's rare. It's rare. So it's not that everybody that goes off to play golf when they've had a vertebral fracture is going to have another one. So I guess really what I'm trying to say to you is that actually it's more risky not to exercise than it is to exercise. And of course we then had COVID. And actually for the first time we heard from the government how important being active was, because they gave us an hour outside or an hour of exercise. But joking aside, that's the first time we've ever had anything from the government suggesting that physical activity is actually really good for you, apart from strategies which get published and nobody's even aware they're out. So, but there was a huge growth of online stuff, some of which was good and some was awful. And some is really unsafe, so it goes straight into high impact without warm-ups, and there's really an awful lot of rubbishy stuff out there. In amongst some good things, but just being aware that by following something online, nobody has actually, you've not had a chance to chat with anybody, you've not talked about whether or not you should be building up impact slowly, etc. So we just need to be a little bit careful perhaps. It's always a good idea to talk to someone who does know what they're talking about when it comes to exercise. And And some training is always a good thing, but I guess I'm just warning, there's an awful lot out there that's perhaps not so good. So on to what is evidence-based that makes a difference. So I'm going to talk to you about three lots of things which build bone and muscle strength. So actually one of the key things about helping bone is something that improves your muscle strength, because muscle pulls on bone and is a stimulus to it. Bone also likes some impact. So it wants a jolt, essentially. And those things are the best thing for bone, and I'll come back to that in a minute. We want to improve our posture. Number one, if somebody has really good posture, even if they have vertebral fractures, apart from getting shorter, you won't see that bending forward, the rounding of shoulders. Posture is really important. It's also really important for balance. Because if we get a bit lazy in our posture and the head's forward and the shoulders roll, our whole centre of mass is brought forward over our toes. If we trip, we're more likely to headbutt the floor because we're already partly there. So posture is really important. And that's where I'm going to come into improving balance. Because if we can reduce some of those potential falls, then we're less likely to have a fracture, even if we've got poor bone strength. How many of you recognise the physical activity guidelines for health? Got one hand, 2, 3. Oh, okay, better. Less than a third. So more of you, less of you know about the physical activity guidelines than fall each year. So important to learn these. These are the physical activity guidelines for health. So in general, not to do with bone health, not to do with falls. The government would like us to do 150 minutes of something that makes us warmer or out of breath, moderate intensity physical activity. That's relative to your fitness. So if you're quite unfit, running up and down those stairs or walking up and down those stairs might get you breathless at the top. That's already moderate for you. So it's relative to your fitness. 150 minutes is quite a lot. It used to be, and some of you might remember this, it used to be 30 minutes on at least 5 days of the week. You might remember that message. It's the same thing, actually, 150. The issue is that you should be trying to build up. You should. We used to have a recommendation just to do 10 minutes at a time. Now we don't. We know enough from our research. It doesn't have to be 10 minutes at a time. But essentially, we should aim for this. Let's have another little hands up. How many of you reckon you do 150 minutes of something that makes you warmer or out of breath? Now that's a lot better. Okay, you're still falling, but anyway, we'll come back. Sorry. Okay, moderate intensity activity. Did you know that you're meant to be doing something that built strength at least 2 days a week? Do you know what things improve strength? Resistance? Weights? I'm just a bit deaf, it's not like me. I'm going to come back because I'm going to talk to you a little bit about things that you maybe think would have improved strength and perhaps don't. We want to improve balance on at least 2 days a week. That's what the recommendation is. My recommendation is you want to improve balance on every day of the week, but we won't go there. And we want to minimize sedentary time. So they don't give an amount of sedentary time because the research is still not brilliant at telling us exactly how long is a bad amount of time for sitting. But I can tell you here and now that if you put an over 70 in a warm room for 35 minutes, hello. Hello. Sorry. Don't worry. If you put somebody who's older in a warm room, as in 30 degrees, now, most of us up here don't ever get that type of temperature, do we? But if you lived in London, you would. In 45 minutes, that sitting will cause an increase in blood pressure, significant. It will cause a reduction in walking speed. And if you put somebody in a cold room for 45 minutes, you'll have a similar detrimental effect. So here I'm talking under 15 degrees. So that's sitting when it's not like normal temperature can have a big effect. But there's an awful lot more, which I'll talk to you about in a minute. So that's what we should be doing. Now doesn't like moving forward either. Oh, no, we've got it. We're all right. Yes. So there's a continuum. I'm mostly up this end, it has to be said, the sedentary light pottering around type activities. Moderate, as I say, is something that gets you slightly warmer. You might want to go to the vigorous, you might want to go to the very vigorous. Not many people do. But exercise is dose response. So the more you do of the more heavier stuff, the better the effects are, actually, unless you really overdo it and then it's detrimental. But most people will not get to that kind of level. But a reminder, it's compared to where you are at the minute. So if you're relatively unfit, it's not going to take an awful lot at all to do something that's moderate. And as you get fitter, it takes more work to do that. So it's great because you actually see the benefit if you're less active much more quickly. Has done it, good. This graph, let me just explain if you've not come across too many graphs before. On the upright axis on the left-hand side is the percentage of people. Along the bottom are different age ranges. You can see it's from age 16 up to 75 plus. And these are the number of people that meet the physical activity guidelines for health. So if you look at the 45 to 54 age range, about a quarter are doing enough for their health. When you get to the over 75s, it's less than 7%. I also would like to say that's a huge exaggeration because that's self-report. Okay, so we're having so few people as we get older actually getting anywhere near those physical activity guidelines for health, which is a shame. Because we know if you meet physical activity guidelines when you're 65, at age 90, you're less likely to be fallers. So it has a protective effect, meeting those physical activity guidelines. Your reduction in falls is more than 40% if you've met the physical activity guidelines when you're 65. However, if you're nowhere near reaching that now, that probably still seems like a mountain. So coming back to build a little bit more each day makes a difference. So wherever you are on that curve, if you do a little bit more, you might eventually get to meet that physical activity guideline. And I'm going to be honest, I don't. So, but the more we can get towards that, the better our bones will be, the better our general health will be. Going to spend a little bit of time on sitting now. Just a reminder, it's bad. At one point, they talked about it being the new smoking. So this is a tweet that comes from an organisation called juststand.org, and this is in adults. 2 hours of sitting, so not getting up at all, just sitting for 2 hours, you'll get a drop of 20% in your good cholesterol, your blood circulation will decrease, increase in blood sugar, and a 25 to 50% slowing of your metabolism. Just 2 hours. And you'd have sat for 2 hours for the first break. So the first thing you need to be doing is getting up and moving. What we do know is that even if people meet the physical activity guidelines, so say they do their 30-minute exercise class, they're sitting the rest of it because they might be sitting for their leisure activities, they're reading, they're knitting, they're listening to music. They might be sitting on transport, getting to and from the exercise session. They might be sitting at their desk doing some computer work. So we actually, a lot of us spend a lot of time sitting. And actually there's some research to suggest the effect of prolonged sitting actually is not negated by reaching the physical activity guidelines. So you need to be you don't necessarily need to be rushing about doing moderate activity, but you need to be on your feet as much as you can. So we know, for example, that people who spend more time sitting have lower hip bone density. Okay? Men can moderate that effect by doing their physical activity for half an hour that day. Women, it doesn't moderate the effect. You need to reduce the sitting to improve bone density. So it's quite interesting. We're starting to see a gender effect happening there. We know that if you sit more, you're more likely to get a bigger waist, you're more likely to get type 2 diabetes, you're more likely to be frail. Sitting is a real problem. But I appreciate for some people, standing is uncomfortable. And some jobs, so you do need to constantly be on the move, I guess. So to break that up, I spent a few years on a project called Sedentary Seniors USP, Understanding Sedentary Patterns. And of course, we were all excited and go, every time there's an advert break, get up and do this and make sure you leave your remote control over there. And all these, and they're going, what a stupid idea. Essentially, the difficulty is that some people value their sitting time. For some, it's getting their energy back. For some, it's a leisure activity that they can't do standing. But there has to be some way that somebody has to think through when are they sitting most and what might they be able to do individually. And one of the studies that we did, we call it the SOS, Stomp Out Sitting study, was where we had a little vibrating monitor that is stuck to their leg. And so it told them when they'd been sitting for more than an hour. And it would just vibrate. And the only way to turn it off was to stand up. They didn't have to do anything. They didn't have to go for a walk. They just had to stand up for 30 seconds. And then the vibration stopped. So it sat down again. And that's exactly what they did, because they were relatively frail people living in sheltered housing. But just by standing up once an hour for 30 seconds, we got an improvement in lower limb function. So they were more able to get out of a chair. They were more able to walk faster. They had more energy to go off and do other things. So it's a starting place. It's just breaking up your sitting on a regular basis. You will help because you're lifting your body weight every time you stand up. You are doing exercise by stealth. So it's a way to start if someone is a bit frailer. You can, I hope, get hold of some of these slides.
Yeah.
Fingers crossed. Good. Because that's a link, for example, to a leaflet which was produced in coordination with older adults on things that might encourage people to break up their sitting a little bit more. And you mentioned, thank you very much, Make Movement Your Mission. This is a very quick, it's not about bone health. This is just about getting you to move more in your day. So 3 times a day, live on Facebook. It's normally at 8 o'clock, 12 o'clock and 4 o'clock. This morning was at 6:45. So it depends where the tutors are in the country and what they're up to. But it's 15 minutes of movement to just break up sitting. Just lost where I was in terms of timing. Right, okay, so we're going to move on to the bit that's probably of most interest to you, which is strong bones and the exercise evidence for that. And I'm going to keep saying exercise evidence because physical activity and exercise are 2 different things. Structured exercise is where you do your physical activity in a planned manner, aiming at improving a component of fitness, and you do it enough that there's a training effect. Physical activity can be a nice walk to the shop, do your shopping, perhaps walk up a hill, have a look out, but it doesn't have the same effect on fitness as exercise where you're aiming to improve a component of fitness. So you do it often enough, repetitively enough, with enough intensity that you have a difference to something. So starting off with, I appreciate it's another graph, apologies, but I'll just talk you through it again. So on the top, on the left-hand side up there, is your BMD, that's bone mineral density, and this is the mean percent change that happens over time. We've got 5 lots of sets of movements or exercises where all the studies that have been done with those types of activities have been put together in one big meta-analysis. And you'll see that each time you've got either above or below the line, and you've got a big, long, thin line in amongst that. That's the variance, that's the difference. So not everybody improves. Some people get worse, some people get better. That's humans for you. we never like being easy. And sometimes studies have shown a big benefit and some doing the same exercises haven't. And there's reasons for that. Sometimes there's not a long enough duration. Sometimes there's not enough intensity or progression. So let me talk you through each of these. On the far left, you have something called dynamic weight bearing but low force. That is things like walking football. Sorry, my formatting's gone a bit there. So something where there's not a high impact. So general walking football, walking netball, that sort of thing. And you'll notice that each of those, the thin line in the middle crosses that 0 line. And what that's basically telling you is that some people improve, some people don't. But on the whole, as an average, you get no real improvement in either spine, that's the red one, in femoral neck, that's the hip, or the trochanter, another part of the hip. Okay. The next one is step aerobics and Kaylee, that sort of dance, impact type dance activities, step aerobics. And you can see that there is an improvement in all three, but sometimes that line drops below 0 again. So some studies haven't shown. Again, we're back to duration and progression. That middle one, where you've got hugely long lines and everything seems to be around about 0, so you haven't got big, nice, colourful bars, is seated exercise swimming. Don't forget this is for bone density as an outcome. Okay. The next one is gym, weights, spin class, get a bit of improvement. And then at the end is where they've mixed all the activities which have a strengthening and an impact part. So it might be a step aerobics class that happens to have weights and weights work in it as well. And you can see huge improvement in spine, huge. Still not that huge, it's 34%. You've done a lot of work, and these are, on average, 9 months to a year's worth of exercise to get that 4%. So it's not that miracle pill. But what you will see on the next couple of slides is if you don't do the exercise, you just go down. So that 4% improvement, if you actually had the control groups in there, it's probably more like 6 or 7% because you'd have had a 1 to 2% drop with age in your control group. Okay. Never know whether I'm supposed to point at the computer or at the... Hey, well done. Okay, so this comes from the Physical Activity Guidelines for Health. It's a rather snazzy little diagram in there, and you might just about be able to read those. So if you look at the bottom line to start with, that's cycling. We're talking road cycling, not spin class. The first column is whether there is significant evidence it improves muscle function, so strength. The next column, the middle column, is whether it significantly improves bone health. And the third one is an improvement in balance. And you can see it only gets 1 star. What you want are the 3 stars. So there's your aerobic, your circuit training, ball games, racket sports. They're the things which have a lot of impact, which have a fair amount of strengthening work. And they're pretty hard work to do unless you've done them already for some time. To start a new racket sport, for example, when you're older and perhaps is not necessarily the best thing to do. But really what I want you to really look at is that walking one. And I'm really sorry, but I'm going to rub it in again. Unless you're going to walk at an aerobic level, so you're really out of breath, with a backpack on, with some extra weight, walking is not going to increase your bone density. It will help maintain it. Yes, definitely. But it won't help increase it. We have so many studies for this now. It's not just a one-off. If you put a lot of extra weight in, you go uphill a lot. You have there's a bit more evidence, believe it or not, for Nordic walking than there is for walking without poles. And that's because you tend to put extra weight down when you're using those. So dance, you see, is a little bit variable. It depends on the type of dance. And dance, at the moment, there have not been enough studies. And if you meta-analyze them, you've got some which is ballroom, then you've got line dancing, and they're obviously quite different on the effect they might have on impact. Yoga and Tai Chi, I'm sure you're all quite upset about. It's just one of those things. You don't usually add a lot of extra resistance, so you usually use body weight for those things. And you can only get so much improvement with body weight. You have to have extra resistance over time to build things. So, just to throw in a few other bits and pieces. Walking, no significant effect on spine bone density, no significant effect on hip bone density, unless it's for over 6 months, brisk walking at least 7 miles a week. So quite a lot. And brisk walking, sadly, if you've got poor balance, you will trip over more and you will more likely fracture something. Because as you get tired, you don't lift your toes quite so much or your knee quite so much, and that little pavement rise will be enough to tip you over. So be careful about brisk walking. You're better off doing a longer distance than you are doing a quicker speed. Vibration, those lovely things you used to stand on in gyms. Ooh, those ones. I can't stand on them because I've got a vestibular problem, make me feel very sick. But there isn't. If you do exercise on them with bands and weights, there is a sign that there is some bone density changes. So for long enough, everybody was touting these as the best thing since sliced bread. They're very good on balance, by the way. Aquatic exercise. Notice that swimming doesn't, aquatic exercise does. And that's because the aquatic exercise, you have big floats and things where you use the water as resistance. So it's that extra strengthening work. Pilates, sorry. Yoga, sorry. It's fabulous for posture, fabulous for many other things. It's not necessarily going to make a huge difference to increase. So what I haven't done, because there's a hell of a lot, excuse my language, there's a lot of studies in here. I haven't actually gone through every single one and gone, if you brought the control group into it as well, you've possibly got a benefit on top of, but if you look, I was just here looking to see if you actually increased bone density. And as you can see, cycling, not so good. There is some nice evidence on line dancing and Kaylee's for impact, so pretty good. But of course, you have to be pretty good aerobically to do that too, stamina-wise. There's a couple of moves that we would suggest thinking about. If you've done them your whole life, carry on. If you're new to yoga or Pilates and this move is suggested to you, maybe it's not a good idea, because these are the 3 moves which have shown vertebral fractures with doing, okay? But again, if you are, posture and spinal movement and alignment is great. You want the spine to remain flexible. So yoga and Pilates has got a very key part for that. Just be a bit careful about showing off doing some of those sorts of moves. Okay, what about jumping on one leg? I just got you to stand on one leg. Obviously, balance is a potential issue, so you're best off not doing this in the middle of the room with nothing to hold on to. But on these studies, they got someone to hop on one leg, so that's the active, the exercise leg, and not the other. So the other leg is your control. This shows how specific exercise is. Okay, so the yellow or the orange bars are the exercise leg, the leg where you're hopping or jumping, and the green are the control leg that you're not. Yeah. And as you can see, it's not huge. We're talking 1% really. But this was a 6-month directional hopping thing. And you can see that the control leg went down and the exercise, the leg you were jumping on or hopping on, went up. So again, a reminder that X-bone is really specific. You've got to be working on the areas you want to improve. All right. This actually came back from the old playing tennis. So tennis players have really strong wrists on the side that they most often hit the ball with, and the other side is much weaker. So it just shows you how specific it is. I believe at lunchtime you can go and have a go at some of these exercises. This is a study called Lift More, and it was a high load, high intensity training program, half an hour, twice a week for 8 months. It's not quick, is it? And in all that, these are people that had already broken, had signs or had x-rays of vertebral fractures, low BMD score, as you can see, so osteopenic or osteoporotic. And they had one adverse event in that whole 8 months of all these people, and that was a muscle spasm. So no fractures, no, this was high impact, high strength work. And as you can see, if you look on the right-hand side this time, biggest effect on lumbar spine, and that's because they were specifically working with people that had vertebral fractures. So they were looking at exercises that were really targeting the spine. Net gain of 4% in 8 months. Fabulous. What did they do? Well, deadlifts, clean jerk and snap, all those sort of, but really important here, they didn't just go off and start doing that. No, they built up slowly. They spent the first month or 2 months in some instances just making sure that people had the perfect technique for doing it, that they did it without weight, just to make sure they were doing the movement properly first. They did that for a long time to make sure that they were doing it safely for when they added the weight. They had 4 fundamental exercises, and within 2 months, everybody had moved on to weight with those. So a deadlift, overhead press, and a back squat. The deadlifts were the warm-up eventually, and they were doing 5 sets of 5 repetitions, and they did it until they actually had to put the weights down. So until the muscle went, no, I'm not doing that again. So proper high intensity. Really, really good study, showed a really good effect, as you can see, on lumbar spine and no fractures. Now, unfortunately, we've got quite a lot of evidence for women. We've got hardly any for men. We still have very few studies, but we're starting to see more. Recently, we know, again, it's that combination. It's strength training and impact that makes the best effect in men. We know, as I mentioned before, that men, if they do their moderate activity for half an hour in a day, doesn't matter how long they sit the rest of the time, it's sort of, they're lucky. They seem to be able to get away with a little bit here and there. It's not so much for the women. I'm going to move past that one. And I want to talk a little bit about the long-term effects. This study has followed people for 16 years after their first intervention, which was a year's worth of exercise, which was a combination, so strengthening and impact. On the left-hand side, you have the spine, and on the right-hand side, you've got the hip. The top line is the group that did the exercise in that first period of time. And the bottom line is the control group that didn't. And as you can see, as those years go by, the gap widens. And if you're in that control group, you are considerably lower bone density now than the people that did that 1 year of exercise at the beginning. The important thing to say here is that they didn't all just do that 1 year and then sit down and not move. What they did is they followed, and actually nearly 70% of them, they weren't doing it to the same duration and frequency, but they remained far more active than the control group. So it changed their habits. It had a change in that effect, so really good. Okay, so just to round that up for the strong, we know it's site specific. So if you want to improve the hip, you need to be doing strengthening work, you need to be walking, preferably with some extra weight. You need to be perhaps doing some strength training again around the hip. Sit to stands is great for hip. If you want to work the spine, we need impact. We know that spine really likes impact, and we need some of that upper body strength work. If you do lower limb strength work, it's not helping the spine. It might help the hips, it's not going to help the spine. So you need variety. Don't get stuck on one activity. Here's a few of them. I'm not going to spend any time on these because there are so many good videos and resources out there. But just a reminder, one of the key ones for posture and for the spine is a back extension. Lying on your floor or on the bed face down, pulling your shoulders up off. So that's a really key one for helping you prevent future spinal fractures, but also to strengthen the core muscles down the spine. Bit of impact, start using the stairs rather than the lift if you can, because that's also impact and it's also strengthening. So think about those sorts of things. Just a reminder that exercise is not as good as medications at you preventing a fracture, I'm going to be honest, but it has so many other benefits wider than that. But if you add them together, so if you have your medication plus your exercise, the benefit is greater than either of those individually. So add some exercise and it will make your bone medications work even more effectively. Except with vitamin D. Vitamin D is the only one that's a bit weird because you have to actually be deficient in vitamin D before you add that and then do strength work to make the difference. So good news. It's certainly not going to be detrimental. It's going to add to the benefit of whatever supplementation you're on. So now I wanted just to move into the steady, keep yourself upright. Risk factors for falls. Well, I've just told you that a third of young people fall. We all fall. The issue is whether or not we can get up again, whether it becomes a fall we shouldn't have had. So the youngsters tend to be falling because they're doing something really high risk. Possibly alcohol, we won't go there. But when we're older, it could be walking across our kitchen floor. So the type of fall changes. So we know that if somebody has poor walking, poor balance, poor functional ability, that's ability to sit, stand, for example. If they're fearful, if you're fearful, you change the way you move. I'm sure you know that. And it actually increases your risk. Even if the rest of your risk factors are good, if you're fearful and you're tense and you look at the floor all the time, you take shorter steps, you're more likely to fall. So fear is an independent risk factor. This quote is for someone who's only a few years older than me, and she won't go out because she's so worried about falling. And she's not got osteoporosis. This just happens to be a lady who's become fearful because she had a nasty fall, got very embarrassed, black eyes, and it just changed everything. So you've got to be a bit careful. Now, I got you to do this test. You can see on both these graphs, you'll notice that men and women are different in their ability to stand on one leg. But there's a cataclysmic drop with age, as you can see. So the older you are, more to the right of the graphs, you can see most people cannot stand for very long. And as I said, that 10 seconds is a rough cutoff for, if you can't manage 10 seconds, your balance is pretty poor and you need to work on it. But interestingly, if you work on it and you're older, you can help your bone density. This is a study where they just got people to stand on one leg. They were actually trying to improve balance. 1 minute, 3 times a day. Got improvement in hip bone density. So maybe do this while you're cleaning your teeth, or you're waiting for the kettle to boil, or something along those lines. You can help your balance, and potentially you can make some difference to your bone as well. Can any of you remember how many sit-to-stands you did in 30 seconds? You've all forgotten that now, haven't you? I'm not going to get you to do it again. But if you do remember, you might look across, for example, I'm 55, so I'm going to go to that first block. And I should therefore, as I'm a woman, I'm looking at the women's graph, should manage between 15 and, about 19, 15 and 19 chair rises in 30 seconds. Is what I should be able to do. If I was 90, I'd be doing between, 5 and 10. So there's going to be a reduction with age. But if you can't manage that, these are normative data. This is where 95% of the population at that age should be able to do. They're the 95% of the population will sit between them. So if you're above that top line, you're like, yay, I'm above 2.5%. Are you not even? Wow, you managed more than 24. I mean, if you're below that bottom line, it means that you are around about where 2.5% of the population is below normal. And if you're above, so 95% of the population will sit between those two lines. Right. What works for reducing falls? Guess what? It's not easy. Neither, same for your bone strength. You need functional balance and strength work. It needs to be challenging. You need to feel wobbly. To improve balance, you need to feel wobbly, because the brain is what keeps you upright, actually. It's the nervous system and the brain that tell which hand to go out, which muscle to move, which part of the body to keep yourself upright. It's the brain that's doing all the hard work. And it can only get good at that if you make it constantly do it. Like Olympic athlete, you want to become really good at a specific sport. It's the same with balance. Unless you challenge and feel wobbly, the brain won't get any better at doing it. So standing on one leg's great, but if you're hanging on for dear life so that you can't actually fall, your brain isn't going to get any better at balance because you're not allowing it to have to work to keep you upright. So it has to be challenging. Sorry. The effects stop when you stop. And that's the same with anything, actually. You get a bit of leeway, maybe a couple of months, but as soon as you stop, everything. So you do need to keep at it. Here's two that are very common in the UK. There's the FAME programme and there's the Otago home exercise programme or group exercise programme. These are the ones which have the strongest evidence base if you're already a faller. So you can just do other things that improve strength and balance, but if you've had a number of falls and you're starting to avoid activity because you're fearful, these are the ones you should go for. So most, for example, Edinburgh Leisure run classes with both of these programs. So you should be able to get a referral if you require one. We know that if you combine falls prevention exercise with bone health medication, you get improved function and reduced falls. So not just the strength exercise I was talking about earlier, this time we're talking about falls. I'm just aware of the time. So the main thing to remember for being steady is being active will help. Just generally being on your feet, even general walking will help. But if you really want to improve your balance, you need to feel wobbly. And again, that's going to be different for all of us because we've all got different levels of balance. So I could turn around and go, oh yeah, go and do that dance class. And someone will go, I can't even do the dance class because I can't stay upright if you whiz me around. So it depends on your own level of balance. For some people, if I got you to, in fact, I'm going to get you to stand up again for a minute. So for those of you who want to join me, stand up for a second on one leg. You can put a finger this time on something because I'm going to challenge your balance even more. So go on to one leg, but make sure you've got a finger or two fingers somewhere that you can hold on to. Right, on one leg, close your eyes for me. Many of you are rocking beautifully now. Okay, open your eyes again. Again, you've got onto your good leg. Let's go onto your bad leg. And this time, if you can, but please be really careful, just take your fingers up a little bit so that they're off whatever you're holding. So you really feel the challenge now of closing your eye. But I want you something nearby. So on one leg, close your eyes. Even some of the youngsters are having trouble. Good, good, right. Good, good. Sit down again. So all I did there, same thing that you were doing and you'd mastered somewhat, but I just took away one of the senses that you use for balance, took away your eyesight for a minute. Also, if you chose to try that one leg stand, but on a nice soft cushion, it would be the same problem. You'd have a lot of trouble. So you can make yourself feel wobbly without actually having to throw yourself into something that's really scary. But just think about all those different senses you need to work on. I'm going to move past that. So we know that almost any form of dance will help balance, unless it's a seated dance. We want to change of direction. We want to change of speed if possible, because head turns are also what makes people dizzy. As we get older, more of us get vestibular problems, inner ear balance problems. That can be for medication reasons. It can just be with aging. It can be with dehydration, and it can also be alcohol. So those four things will make a difference to your inner ear balance, as I would call it. But again, you can learn to either cope better with that, so not twisting, but stepping your way round rather than turning the head too fast. I wouldn't suggest you go around doing that constantly because you'll probably just feel really sick and vomit. So vestibular issues are a problem, but almost any activity where you are going to feel slightly wobbly will help balance. There are quite a number of, this is a leaflet that comes from the Alliance, but there are quite a number of resources out there that help with some strength and balance exercises to keep yourself tip-top condition in that way. But I would just like to go back again. If you are avoiding activity because you're worried about your balance, your best bet is to go to a proper class with someone who's trained and can work with you to improve that. Just going to finish off with a few bits that are in this statement about straight. So that's about good posture. It's about what to do to strengthen your back muscles, to maintain that good posture, but also what to do if you've had a vertebral fracture, about lifting. Because let's face it, if someone says don't lift anything, well, hang on a minute, you've got to put your washing in the washing machine, you've got to pick up your shopping bag off the floor, you've got all of these other things. So safe ways of doing that and maintaining doing that is a really important thing. I've got a few pictures to show in a second. You'll notice that these both have C's next to them. So the sentence and there's a little C. That means it's consensus. We didn't have enough published research. So this is a load of people in a room going, this is a good thing, rather than being able to go, research papers showed us this works. Yeah. So again, it's about positive and reassuring how to lift safely. We know that if we are going to do exercises to improve our posture, and there's some examples there, we want to make sure we're doing them repetitively. We are constantly thinking about where the head is, so it's not forward, bringing it back over. You also say, every time I mention posture, all of you sit up beautifully. It's really lovely. And you want to do it repetitively. So just doing it once a week isn't going to do it. You really be wanting to do it on a much more regular basis. Think straight when you're lifting. So whereas we do want spine flexibility, which is why yoga and Pilates is good, When you're lifting something and weight, you want to think of the spine as being straight as a die, and you're bringing all the way in close first before you lift, making the legs do more of the work, which is why that sit to stand's really good, because that's going to prepare you to do a better, safe lifting. And these are the overall recommendations. There's an awful lot to read there, but essentially impact as often as you can, ideally up to 50 impacts a day. So that could be up and down stairs. It could be some general hopping carefully. It could be some dancing. So something where you've actually got a bit more than just a general footfall when you're walking. Muscle strengthening 2 to 3 days a week, please. Ideally do it until the muscle goes, really, do you have to do another one? Because that way you're going to have a training effect. It's not a bad thing to feel a little bit of discomfort the day after or the day after that and go, I forgot I had a muscle there, because that means you had a strengthening effect on it. If you do it too much so you can't move, then it's not a good idea. So build up slowly and do everything with beautiful technique. So nice and upright. Always think about your posture. Set yourself up before you move. Of course, the minute we start moving, we forget about the posture. So you just constantly want to be reminded about posture. There's some fabulous resources on the Osteoporosis Society website, videos on how to increase impact over time, how to do strength work. You'll see that there's always 2 different levels, should we say, of people's abilities in there. Lots of good webinars, including myself having a natter about falls, for example. So go and have a look at those. Don't want to pull you away from the Lydia. Plus, of course, you've got great stuff there. But should you fancy a change, you can have a look at the Royal Osteoporosis Society ones. There's also a few apps out there if you like an app. So there's something called Keep On, Keep Up, which is free. It's only available on tablets. It doesn't work on a phone, so it has to be a tablet. But these are strength and balance exercises to help reduce your risk of falls. And I just want to finish off last couple of slides. If you're really worried about your bone, hello, didn't like that one. Go back there. Then there are obviously physiotherapists know an awful lot about exercise and bone health. But also so do postural stability instructors. These are exercise instructors rather than physiotherapists. We've had a lot of training and can adapt and support you to build up over time safely. If you're interested in falls, and also think about the Otago exercise leaders if you're particularly worried about falls. Those 2 programs are the best ones to go for with the most evidence. So finally, in conjunction with your medications, I am not suggesting you all drop your medications and just do exercise. As you've just seen, you do an awful lot of work for exercise without a massive increase in bone density. But it's all the other benefits to your quality of life, to flexibility, to be able to have your grandchildren on your shoulders and go for a wander, for example. Ideally, aim to meet the physical activity guidelines. Build up and do a little bit more each day. So aim for, if you can, getting that regular out of breath for a bit, regular muscles feeling warm, shaky, regular feeling a bit wobbly. Try and see if you can get it into the general daily activity routine. For stronger bones, you want impact, you want strength work. Build that up slowly if you're not used to it. If you are, carry on. But don't just stay where you are. If you stay where you are, you're not adding a training effect. You need to work the body. It's just like anything, you need to work the body a bit harder. At least 3 times a week, but in an ideal world, you'll be doing something regularly throughout every day. Don't do strengthening work every day, because believe me, your muscles will tell you about it. If you're going to work them that hard, you need a day's break in between to give them a rest, get the blood flow back in and get them ready for the next one. Stick at it. So all the evidence for improvements in bone density are more than 6 months. In fact, most are more than 9 months before you actually will see an increase in bone density. And it's just like the pills. As soon as you stop taking the pills, it'll stop working. So you need to keep at it. Avoid prolonged sitting and essentially try and do that a little bit more each day. It will make a huge difference. The real risk is doing nothing. That's it. Thank you. I'm aware we're a little bit over time, but then obviously we had the IT issue. So we've got time for a couple of questions, and then I think, Dawn, you might be around at coffee break. Is that all right? So, yep, I'll question up here. Yes? Hang on, I'll get back. She's just said you want to have a chat with the yoga slide. I'll get there in the end. Where's he going?
Yeah, it looks like on the yoga slide that there was one exercise you were recommending.
No, I'm not recommending any of them. I can't even find them. Where's it gone? No, there it is. No, all of those are a no-no. All right, so postures emphasizing spinal alignment and extension to mid-range. So not all the way down so for example, standing and rolling down to touch your toes, we're suggesting, unless you've always done it, don't start doing it. And so that's on the floor or in standing. So the top one, D, is essentially that move, but lying on the floor. But you can also do that in standing. So you can roll all the way down and touch your toes and roll all the way back. We're suggesting that you do that if you've done it before. So if you've always been doing that, you can still do that if you're not used to it, but just build it up slowly. We do encourage forward flexion to maintain movement, but you need to do some back extension at any point, because otherwise we're all going to become doing that, and it's very much more about opening up. So our main thing is to always do back extension work rather than flexion, but we're back again to if someone has done it before, then they should carry on.
Does that apply to the pictures?
We are saying that we're not stopping. We don't think people should never do any of those on the right. We're suggesting if you have been in a Pilates or a yoga class for years and you've done that for years, carry on doing it. If you've not, if you're new, perhaps best not to. I have met people who've done yoga or Pilates for absolute years. They have the most amazing flexibility. They can get down and put both hands flat on the floor. But they've been doing it for years. And they have osteoporosis, but they always repeat it. When they come back up, they do it slowly, carefully. They make sure they're not heads hanging heavy. So they've learned how to do it safely. The issue is if you're not that flexible and you can't start new to do that, your head's heavy. Your head's about 20 odd kilos. So as soon as you do that and it's out of alignment, you are potentially causing a wedge fracture. And that's what some of those have shown in some studies, that people who are new to those can get wedge fractures. Thank you. One more, just time for one more quick question. Oh, no, sorry. Oh, we've got a question in the other room. Oh.
Well,
I'll try and do a short answer.
One question from the room and then we'll come back to you. Oh, no, sorry, hang on. We're going to take another question from here.
Would you recommend this kind of gear to prevent osteoporosis?
Would I recommend? I didn't catch the question. Chiropractor. No, I wouldn't. Sorry. No, I think we're best off, people that really know about bone density, and the training for chiropractors is not a long period of training. And so I would probably suggest not, no.
One last question.
Sorry, I just wanted to add something, if it's okay. I am 6 years old, and I started my yoga 4 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Then I had so much pain here and there, everywhere. I mean, when I would wake up in the morning, it would take me long to stand up. I was walking. And the kind of yoga we can do, I'm just suggesting if I'm allowed. There are so many different kinds of yoga.
Yes,
the one I'm doing is Iyengar.
Okay.
Iyengar is a kind of yoga that you work on your strength, on stretch, focus, mind, everything all together. So it's a kind of exercise. Now I can do all this movement that you can see behind you without any problem. In the first day, I could not do it. So I do agree with you. You have to build up.
You've
slowly.
said it beautifully. You've taken 4 years and now you can do it.
Yes.
So you didn't
yes.
try and do it in the first week.
No, definitely not.
Absolutely.
Definitely not. But what I'm saying is, I am 6 years old, and when I started, I had passed my mid-50s, and I could not think of doing it. And the other thing is, when we are sitting down or standing up or going up and down stairs, it's important to active the muscle top of the knees.
Yes.
So these things I think is important, because if we keep standing up, sitting down, or even standing on one leg, if we active the leg, it's much easier than not doing it.
Absolutely.
Or holding the toes on the, normally we don't use the toes on the floor when we are standing or walking. We have to learn to balance the toes as well.
Mindfulness on using all the toes, because they're your balance, they're keys balance. Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the question, how much drinking water would help?
It would help your vestibular system hugely, because obviously if you get dehydrated, you're far more likely to have dizzy problems to do with your inner ear. But as far as I'm aware, there's not a huge amount of evidence, believe it or not, for falls prevention. We know in care homes, if they're dehydrated, then they're more likely to get urinary tract infections, for example, which make your balance worse. But believe it or not, there's not, again, it's to do with the lack of research at it. There's been a couple of small studies, but not enough to be clear at all on those, I'm afraid.
Thank you. We'll have to stop there for some kind of